When we think about war, our minds usually jump to tanks, jets, soldiers with rifles, the usual stuff. But history is filled with chapters that are way, way weirder. We're going to dive into the truly bizarre and, frankly, terrifying side of human creativity when it comes to fighting each other.
Yeah, this quote pretty much nails it, doesn't it? It's cynical for sure, but it's also brutally honest. It's a reminder that when things get desperate, the rulebook for what counts as a weapon just gets completely tossed out.
All right, so our first stop on this, let's call it a tour of twisted technology, is the animal kingdom. Seriously. Long before we had smart bombs, commanders looked at the creatures around them and thought, how can we use that? It led to some of the most unusual and, let's be honest, cruel tactics you can imagine.
Okay, put yourself in this scenario. You're a Roman soldier. Staring you down is a line of war elephants. These things are literal ancient tanks, giant, armored, and they can smash through your lines like they're not even there. Your sword and shield feel pretty useless. So what do? How on earth do you fight that?
Well, the solution wasn't a bigger spear or a thicker wall. Nope, it was something you'd be more likely to find on a farm. The answer, and I am not making this up, was a pig.
So here's the wild part. The real weapon wasn't the fire itself. It was pure psychological terror. See, elephants are apparently terrified of the high-pitched squeal of a pig. So you take that sound, add the sight and smell of fire, and you get a weapon that drives these massive war elephants completely insane with fear. They'd turn right around and stampede back through their own army. Brutal, but a shockingly effective bit of psychological warfare.
Now, you'd think, okay, lighting animals on fire and using them as weapons, that has to be a thing of the ancient past, right? Well, not so fast. Let's jump forward a couple of thousand years to World War II, where we find an idea that was just as strange and maybe even more destructive.
This is just a whole other level of out-of-the-box thinking. The bat bomb was a real U.S. military project. The whole idea was to use the bat's own instincts against the enemy. You'd drop these canisters full of bats over a city. They'd fly out and find places to roost in attics and buildings. And then, boom, thousands of tiny fires starting all at once from the inside. It was a logistical nightmare and ultimately got shelved. But wow, it just goes to show you they were willing to try anything.
Okay, let's shift gears now, from biology to chemistry. Because when gunpowder showed up, it didn't just lead to the neat, tidy guns we know today. Oh no. Its first appearances on the battlefield were every bit as chaotic and terrifying as a flaming pig.
Just look at this comparison. It says everything. On one side, you've got the catapult. It throws big rocks. It does its job. It's reliable. You know what you're getting. And then you've got the fire lance. This thing was less a weapon and more just a controlled explosion on a stick. It was just as likely to blow up in your own face as it was to hurt the enemy, but its pure shock and awe value, absolutely off the charts.
And the design was so simple it's almost funny. This was, for all intents and purposes, the very first gun. It wasn't about hitting a target. It was about spewing fire, noise, and junk at the guys running towards you. This simple, messy contraption is the direct ancestor of every single firearm that came after it. What a wild first draft.
So we've got panicked pigs, bomb-strapped bats, personal flamethrowers. What's the common theme here? What is it that pushes people to come up with these ideas? Well, like a lot of things in war, it really boils down to a mix of pure desperation and self-interest. This quote really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? These inventions weren't just about some grand strategy to win a war. They were about survival. They were about giving yourself an edge. I mean, if your crazy idea, your flaming pig, is the one thing that saves your skin, then that greedy impulse to survive suddenly seems like the most logical thing in the world. It's a pretty cynical take, but it's hard to argue against. So, what can we take away from all this? Well, it's pretty clear that conflict is a huge, if terrifying, motivator for innovation. It also shows that when you're desperate enough, the weirdest ideas start to sound pretty good. And, it seems like ethics are often the first thing to go out the window in a war. The battlefield really is where that thin line between genius and total madness just seems to vanish.
And all of this leads us to one last, kind of unsettling thought. We've been looking at the past, right? But this pattern, this kind of twisted creativity, it never actually stopped.
If history has taught us anything, is that somewhere out there, right now, somebody is working on an idea that sounds every bit as insane as a bat bomb or a fire lance. It really makes you wonder,
What terrifying, bizarre, and maybe even brilliant weapons are being cooked up in some lab today, just waiting for their moment? What do you think is next?